Hello guys, my name is Borax and today I'll be working on a tier list on every single TFT origin that has come out so far. The way I'll be rating these is on my personal opinion, of course, but it will be based on how much fun they are to play with, and secondarily, how much fun they are to play against, which will negatively impact them. Pretty much the reason why I'm doing this is because I want to remind everyone about the different origins, because the ultimate goal is actually to rate every single champion based on how much fun I think they are, and I think this video could be interesting anyways. A little trip down memory lane of all the TFT origins, and it's good to see people's opinions based on like how strong and how much fun they think the different origins are, because I mean there have been a lot of different ones, and yeah, let's get into the video. So first up we have Astro, which gave every single champion of the Astro tier less mana costs for their abilities. So if you had the 3 Astros, then their abilities would cost less mana. There's a lot of different mana affecting origins, and for me, they're kind of interesting. I like Origin because I like Astro, as an origin, because I do like the identity of it, which is kind of fun. But it's something that gets me too excited, and it doesn't like really matter to me if the enemy's going it. So I'm gonna put it at a C tier, a good little baseline. Next we have Battlecast as an origin. And what this did was it gave you either damage or healing based on how much health you had at the moment. This is one of the ones where it's like, man, no one really played this origin ever, in my opinion, in set 3.5. So it's kind of hard to rate. It just didn't really feel ever satisfying to use. It's an interesting idea where if you like hit someone, I think it was 5 times, or you got hit 5 times, you could then use the ability from Battlecast, but I think this goes in the D tier for me, just because it really wasn't used much, and just even when it was being used, it didn't really feel that satisfying for either person playing against it or using it. Next up we have Celestial, and when you had this origin, you gained healing for your entire team. I think it's a solid origin overall. I kind of actually favor the origins which are more simple and ones that give your whole team a buff, because it feels fun to splash into your team comp. It's like, oh cool, I got 2 Celestial in, making me feel good. I feel like the classes should be more of a way to define your team. At least that's how I enjoy it personally. So for Celestial, I'll give it an A rating, just because healing, the downsides of it is that there's so much healing reduction in the game at certain points where you kind of didn't feel the usage of it, or if you didn't have the healing reduction in items, it was kind of annoying to play against because the whole team would be healing a bunch. But yeah, I think for me it's an A tier. Next up we have Chrono, which gave your entire team attack speed based on like time. So after a certain amount of time, your team would gain attack speed. I know they changed it a couple of times, but I don't fully remember it. But I'll be putting it up on the screen. Yeah, it's an interesting one for sure. I think this is another A tier for me, because I do like the idea of having the team-wide buff and gaining the attack speed, making your whole team like shoot faster. It was good early game, mid game. It was an interesting late game comp. So for me, I think it's actually high on the A tier, but almost an S tier. Next up we have Cloud as an origin from set 2. This one gave your entire team dodge chance based on the number of Cloud champions that you had. For me, dodge chance, it kind of feels nice to use, but it isn't like too fun, because you don't really see the impact. It's kind of hard to notice, and then when you're playing against it, it's kind of annoying to have your attacks being dodged. And I'm not a huge fan of an origin being completely ignored by like a certain ability. So pretty much if you have an RFC, you completely ignore Cloud. So for those reasons, I'd give it honestly a D tier. It's an interesting concept, but it just wasn't that fun for me to use or see to play against. I should mention, actually, my biases might come in here, where set 1 was my favorite, Set 2 was my least favorite by far. And then I really enjoyed set 3, both 3 and 3.5. 4 was okay, and 4.5 has been okay so far. So I'll just put that out there, and we'll see if that affects my tier list overall, but hopefully it doesn't too much, because I really just want to base it on the origins in general. Next up we have Crystal, which made it so that made it so that you can't take a certain amount of damage. It maximized the amount of damage you could take from being hit by certain abilities. It's really strong of an origin, and that's kind of the problem, because there's not really any counterplay to it. You can't get MR shredding or anything like that. It just made units really tanky. Luckily, in that set 2, those units weren't the strongest, but if you can imagine that those units were really strong, this would be a really annoying origin to face up against. So for me, it's honestly, I think, a D tier. Just because, it is fun to see, but it's so unfun to play against that, yeah, I'd put it in D tier. Next up, we have Cultist. Now, Cultist is an interesting origin because the big Galio that spawns is really cool looking, which gives it props, but at the same time, this origin's not really satisfying to use, because if you go this origin, your entire team is kind of garbage, because they don't synergize well together. So the origin itself has to be really, really strong, because it doesn't give the characters any combat stats. I think that design for an origin class is really bad, where you're just relying on the origin to carry you, because it's really hard to balance, because either it's going to be really strong or it's going to be really, really bad. And I think we've seen that all throughout this TFT set, where either Cultist is top of the meta or it's near the bottom of the meta. And I think for that, I have to give it an F tier, honestly, just because it is a really cool idea, but you don't really want to have your entire team comp just relying on the origin itself, where it's very cookie cutters, oh, do you get this origin? You win. It's over. So yeah. Next up, we have Cybernetic, which is one of my favorite origins throughout TFT. What it did is, when you gave your units items, they gained damage. I think they gained a certain amount of AD, and they gained health, and all the characters used it really well. In the original, set 3 was a little annoying to utilize, because it was only 3 or 6, and it was really hard to get that echo to complete this cybernetic thing. But once you got 3.5 coming in, they added in vain, so it was easier to get the 6, which made this origin kind of fun to play. More fun to play in general. For me, Cybernetics is actually going to go into the S tier, just because I think this is what an origin should look like. You're building a team comp that's buffing all of your units and making them feel fun to play. That's a problem with Cultist or Battlecast, because it's not really Battlecast less so, but definitely with Cultist, it's not really the units that are shining, it's something else that's shining. But with Cybernetics, it's really each one of your units becomes useful and satisfying to see and use. And so for me, I think that's the way an origin should function. Next up, we have Slayer as an origin. And for me, I actually really like the 5-cost origins, because it makes the 5 costs really shine. I don't think any 4 costs should ever have this thing where they have a unique origin. Slayer, what it does is, I think every 2 autos, your character jumps and gains a shield, something like that. It'll be up on the screen, so I don't have to memorize everything. So, also for all these origins, I should mention that I'm not really taking into the, characters too much into, how I'm rating it, how fun the characters are to use, even though I kind of did it for Cybernetics, but you're going to ignore that. And so I'm not really thinking about Samira, how annoying her ultimate it is to play against, although it is really fun to see. I am taking really long to rate, whatever this is called. I think I said at the beginning. Anywho, I think I'd give this an A tier, because I do like having the 5 costs being unique, where they only have less synergies perhaps, but they have something very unique which makes them strong. Although in Samira's case, she has still the 3 synergies, so it kind of takes away from that. But yeah, I'll give this an A tier. Next up we have, which I believe is Darkstar. And the idea behind Darkstar is that you want your units dying, like certain units dying, so that the rest of your team becomes stronger. You're giving them, I believe it was ability power and attack damage. I'm not 100% sure. But I'm not a huge fan of this personally, because it's kind of like you're just getting like one or two characters really, really strong to carry your whole team. And it's just not really fun to play against, in my opinion, and it's kind of lame seeing like just some characters are purely there to die and make the other characters stronger. I'll put this as a C tier for me personally. I can see the merit of it, like people really enjoyed watching that one character just become super strong and killing everyone else, but I don't think like that's what teamfight tactics should be, because it doesn't really feel like a team fight anymore. It becomes like everyone's sacrificing just to make one character strong. So for me, it goes into the C tier. Next up, we have Demon. And what Demon did is every time the characters would attack other like the enemy characters, they would steal away their mana, or have a chance to steal away their mana. And that was really annoying to play against. This and Poison, where your characters don't get mana to use, is really not fun to play against. And for me, I didn't really enjoy playing it either, because it's just like I'm just not allowing the enemy characters to do their things. And I think that's okay more for characters' abilities, but just to have an origin that just shuts down like what the enemy is trying to do is not a great idea in general. It's just not fun to play against, like, so much that I think this goes in either F tier or D tier. I do like it a little bit because it was very thematic, having the demon characters, and it is kind of like fun to use, but just so unfun to play against that for me goes into D tier. Next up we have Desert. What Desert does, it made you have Armor Shred, I believe. Yeah, Armor Shred. A very simple origin. It is a way to counter people going like Vanguards, or just like a tankier team comp. Again, I'm not a huge fan of just origins being splashed in to shut down other origins. I don't know. It's just something I personally don't enjoy. I can see other people enjoying it. It's a decent origin. I'll put it in C tier. It's an interesting idea to have something just to splash in, but it's nothing that really excites me or gets me out of the bed. Next up, we have Divine. Divine is an origin where when you get attacked or attack a certain amount of times, then your character gets, they get crowd control reduction, as in you're no longer CC'd, they take less damage, and then they start doing true damage. It's an interesting origin, but it's one that I've never truly enjoyed, especially because, like, the way they balance Divine is they make a lot of the characters kind of suck because the origin's so strong. And then they make just some units use it really, really well that it kind of falls short for me. Like, every time this origin has been strong because, like, there's one character that uses it really, really well in, like, Warwick or, like, Kale. And every other character's just there just to make that one character use his origin super well. That's why I really like Cybernetic, because like all the characters could utilize the Cybernetic buff at like certain points, so it felt very satisfying to use. While Divine is like, if you had 4 Divine, it's just like, it's really whatever, because the characters just weren't that strong to make up for the fact that the buff is so strong. So for me, it's a D tier origin, even though it's like a good, interesting idea. I think it just does too much, because it does like 3 different things that the characters are so weak to like compensate for it. Next up, we have Dragon's Soul, not to be confused with Dragon, which I almost confused. Dragon's Soul is another one of those buffs like Battlecast. This one is when you attack a certain amount of times, you do a bunch of damage, a bunch of like burst damage. And it's an interesting idea. This one's hard for me to rate because it is pretty cool where you're gaining attack speed, you're gaining ability power, and then you're getting that big splash damage to hit people with. This one's hard for me to rate. I think I'll give this our first B tier because it is an interesting origin, more interesting than Battlecast, and it has more of an identity, I feel. But at the same time, it's also very, very rarely used similarly to Battlecast. Honestly, I think I might have to just put it next to it because it's one of those origins where it's either going to be really, really OP or really, really bad. It's just so hard to balance that I think this is not what like origins should look like. I think that's the biggest problem with that. Next up, we have Dragon, which has made certain units have a bunch of MR. I actually really like this origin. It has a good identity. It has like a few units attached to it. It's something you splash in, and it's like boom, an instant like power spike, but you get it like kind of later. For me, Dragon is actually an A tier origin. Sure, it might have been way too like strong because of the numbers associated with it, but as long as like it's I feel like you can find a way to balance Dragon and just make it fun to use in general. And even though it is a way to counter mage comps just like so simply, which I have complained about with the desert comp, it's just like so limited. It's like such a limited amount of units that it feels better in general, in my opinion. Next up, we have Dusk, which gave all of your units a little bit of AP, and it gave the units that were Dusk even more AP. For me, I really liked Dusk. It just felt very satisfying to use all the time. It's a nice little origin where you could put it in, and every time you used it, it just felt very good. It wasn't too annoying to face. Sure, the enemy team like had a little buff to it, but then they had to like have some weaker units in to get the buff. But then those weaker units were still actually doing decent jobs because of it. For me, I think honestly Dusk is an S tier because all the units use it really well. Everyone can use ability power, and it just felt very fun to use in general. Next up, we have Elderwood, and Elderwood gives everyone a little bit of armor and MR as well as damage, and it scales as the fight goes longer. I think this one's a good origin. I think it's pretty fun to use because you are rewarded for building a tankier team because as the fight goes longer, you're getting stronger and stronger. The enemy has like a need to try and kill them faster. It can be a bit frustrating to play against because if you have a team that is also slow, you're most likely just going to lose because you don't have this origin. So I think it has a good identity. It's pretty fun in general. I think I'll give this an A tier. Next up, we have Electric as an origin. And the way Electric works is if your characters deal critical strikes or they take critical damage, like critical strike damage, then they do damage, something like that. Again, I didn't play set 2 a lot. I'm kind of trying to do this best off of memory. And I think it's a pretty interesting origin in general. It's like something pretty unique, playing off of the critical strike stuff. It's very unique to the characters, and I'll give this the actual first B tier. I don't really have too much to say about it. Next up, we have Enlightened, because I don't remember what this one is off the top of my head. Oh, no, this, I do remember. sorry. This is Elementalist from set 1, which is like Cultist, but you only needed less units to summon the creature at the very beginning, and it was something very fun to splash in, just to get that like extra unit to tank up some damage. For me, this one is an A tier, while Cultist is an F tier, because Cultist, you need to invest your whole team in order for Cultist to shine, and this one, you only needed a smaller investment. Actually, I should probably put it... No, I'll put it at A tier. And you could argue, like, oh, 3 Cultists is pretty much the exact same thing as 3 Elementalist, but the whole idea that, like, your whole team has to get to half health in order for you to utilize the Galio to come in and to do his little bit of CC. I don't know. It just, again, it was either really, really strong or really, really sucky. So for me, it still stays F tier, while Elementalist will go A tier for me. Next up, we have Enlightened, which gives your characters mana, increased mana generation. For me, it's the same as Astro. It's pretty middle of the tier. It just makes your team get more mana. It's a solid origin, but nothing too exciting. Next up, we have Exile from set 1, which just gave your unit double the HP as a shield, like 100% of its HP as a shield. I really, really liked this origin. It felt very fun to use. It was really rewarding to build health items, which I think is very not rewarding most of the time. For me, this is actually an S tier, just because it actually gives a reason for Warmogs existing. And I think it's a very simple origin, very satisfying. Yeah, I just really like this one. Next up, we have the current set's Exile Origin, which pretty much does the same thing, but now it's only 50%. And once you have 2 of these guys, you then get the 80% lifesteal. For me, this one's actually a lot worse in a way, because you don't actually... No one ever builds health on these characters, even though I always want to build health, but it's a complete bait to do so. So for me, it kind of fails in that. It just makes your character a little bit tankier. I think it would be cooler maybe if you hit the 2 Exile, then you would get the 100% again, so you would be rewarded for building health and actually utilizing this origin. So for me, this sits at a B tier, just because it doesn't actually deliver on what you want it to deliver. Next up, we have Fabled, and what Fabled does is it gives your units a new ability if you have the 3. I think this one's really, really cool because it spices up the games. It makes some units really shine and pop out, and it like defines a whole team comp. You can like play an origin team comp, but you're not like super duper set into like only using Fabled units, which the Dragon Soul and the Battlecast team comps and the Cultist team comps like force you into, and those just feel really weird. Like Fabled is easier to balance. You can just adjust the numbers of those 3 characters. You don't need to adjust the whole numbers of an entire origin. So for me, Fabled is actually an S tier. I think it's the way you should try and make the whole Dragon's Soul, Battlecast, and Cultist team comps work, where it's like a very interesting, unique idea, but you're not forced to go a whole team around it. Next up, we have Fortune, which is the first of the gold income origins. Now, I love gold income origins so much because I really like the economic side of TFT, which most people probably won't say. So I'm a little biased to this, but like I think everyone actually does enjoy it. It's like, oh, cool, I got a little bit of gold. Like, I'm gaining an advantage over my opponents in exchange for like some HP, most likely, as your team is losing out. The only thing with Fortune, though, is it's kind of annoying to play against, because let's say someone's lose streaking with Fortune and then they are able to get like a sneaky win against someone who's like trolling. You're kind of like very annoyed at that person in the lobby. And for that reason, I'm going to give it a B tier, because Fortune's also kind of frustrating to play as, especially with the whole system with the Chosen, because you need a Chosen Fortune in order to play this comp. If you want to like play 6 Fortune. So it's very like, it's kind of random when you actually do get the opportunity to play this. And it's kind of annoying to play against, because if that guy cashes out and gets a bunch of items and stuff, it feels like just really annoying in general to play against. But even though I'm complained a bunch about it, just getting gold as an origin is like a cool little fun idea in my opinion. Next up, we have Glacial. I'll say this one's set 1 Glacial, where your units had a chance to stun enemies, and it would ramp up based on the number of Glacial units you had. This one is similar to me as Demon, where you're just not allowing the enemies to do stuff that they want to do, which I think is fine for champion abilities, but I don't think it's a good idea for an origin, just because it's so unfun to play against. So for me, I'm going to put it into the D tier. Next up, we have the set 2 Glacial, which is pretty much the same thing, but now as you had more Glacial units, you got more damage, like they just gave you magic damage. And again, this one's going in D tier, just because being stunned because of an origin is not fun. And another thing is, if you're playing as this origin, if you're relying on a percentage thing in order to like have your team comp doing stuff, you can be really annoyed, because like every auto you're like, come on, stun him, stun him, stun him, and it might not, or it might stun him. So yeah, it's just kind of a frustrating origin in general. So for me, it's a D tier. Next up, we have the Hextech origin, which was in set 1. When the way this one worked is it would just disable some items of your enemy's characters. It it would like shoot like a blast, so you couldn't group up your carries together. And it would disable their items for like a certain amount of seconds. This one's an easy F tier. It's like Glacial Demon, where you weren't allowed to use your units. This one was just you weren't allowed to use your items. Like this one was such an OP origin in a way, and it was just not fun to play against. You had to like position just because someone had this origin. Just it was a good idea because they wanted people to be like, oh, maybe I could not rely on the items in like TFT, but like in TFT the items make the game, so having an origin remove the items, not a good idea, and I think that's why we haven't seen anything like that in a while. Like they also tried it again kind of in set 3, where you had that one, I forgot what it's called, the worlds, when you would spawn in, you know what I mean, but the one where you were only allowed to have like 1 item or 2 items on your characters when you spawn in. Like most people didn't like that either, just because it changed the game, and it was just weird. People don't like that. It's a good try, Riot, but not a huge fan. Next up we have Imperial from set 1. This one doubled the damage of your Imperial units, either random or all of them based on how many you had. I think this one's an easy S tier for me. I love this one. It's very satisfying. You have to spec into this. It made those units really, really shine. It made the enemy like, no, oh, these are the units you got to focus down. It can be a little frustrating to play against, and it can be a little frustrating to playing as, because like, let's say your Darius kept getting the buff when you wanted your Draven to get it. That was a bit annoying, but it was just so satisfying to see you getting that double damage that I think this is a great origin. It's simple but effective. Next up we have Infernal as an origin. And this one is just a champion ability as an origin. This one is one of the big reasons I hated set 2. I think one of the reasons I don't like set 2 that much is because a lot of the origins felt like champion abilities in a way. At least this one definitely did, where there would be like, your abilities would do extra damage over time, and it would put like a fiery zone under the hexes. This one's hard to describe just because there's so much text. I'll put it up on the screen so you can read it, so you can like confirm what I am saying or better understand it. For me, this one's a D tier again, just because it did way too much for an origin. It was just way stronger. Like, how can this one compare to something like this one where it's just you get 100% health increase, or this one you get like AP. This one you just gain like plus 300% damage over like multiple hexes if you had enough Infernal units. It was just insane. Next up we have Light, which is very similar to Darkstar, where as your units died, the other units would heal and gain attack speed. So it was like everyone had that one item that builds out of Tear and Giant's Belt. Redemption, yep, that item. I put this in the C tier as well. I think it's a decent origin, but having an origin that just really emphasized having one carry is not my personal favorite. I don't think it's that fun to play against either, because you need to like 3-star that carry or just have perfect items for them. So for that reason, I'm going to put it in C tier. Next up, we have Moonlight and Lunar. That's Moonlight. This is Lunar. And Lunar for me is an S tier, because the way it worked is as the fight went longer and longer on, your whole team would gain, I think, ability power and critical strike chance or damage. And it was just really cool because it would take a while for this to ramp up, but when this ramped up, it was really, really strong, and your whole team really felt the impact. So the team was really incentivized. The enemy was really incentivized trying to kill your team quicker. I think it's better than Elderwood because it was a little weirder to splash in, but when you splashed it in, it just felt very nice in general. Next up, we have Mech Pilot. And Mech Pilot is honestly maybe my favorite origin, even more than Cybernetic. It just felt very satisfying. It was very cool in general. I'll admit it was hard to balance. I think that's maybe why it doesn't go in A tier, but for me, I'm going to still put it in S tier. There were so many comps you could run around this little origin, kind of like how I was talking about Fabled. I think it's like in the same exact idea as Fabled, where it's just a thing where you would where you get 3 characters that you don't really think would synergize that well, maybe would find a way to synergize because of this origin, and then you could build a comp around that just because of that one origin synergy, where then you could use the class to build like a comp. What I'm rambling about is, like, you could go mages because of Mech Pilot with the Annie in it, or you could go assassins because of the Fizz. So there's just so many comps you could run. It was just really fun. Next up we have Moonlight, actually. And Moonlight was really problematic in set 4. Either it was really good or really bad. It's another one of those kind of similar to these origins where it's like so defining for your comp. Like if you're going Moonlight, it's a Moonlight comp kind of. It was very like stagnant in the play style. Like you were very committed to playing Moonlight because you had to roll down. For me, I think this is an F tier, and the reason for that is it introduced the idea of having 4-star characters, which is just really hard to balance around, and it's just like a foreign idea. I think it's just not really fun to play against because it's like, why does that guy have a 4-star unit? That's just better just because he has this origin. I don't know. I think it's just an origin that it's a creative idea like these, so I'll give them props for that, but just did not feel like satisfying. I don't know. Just not a fan. Not a fan. Next up, we have Mountain as an origin from set 2. And this one just gave one of your units a big shield, and I love this origin. It's simple. I don't think it's an S tier because I don't think it's like the greatest origin, but it's simple. It was very satisfying to have. It's like, oh yes, nice, my random carry or like this unit got a big shield. It was always useful, which I think is a big perk of it, because no matter who got the shield, at least they would still tank up some damage. And for me, I think that's why it gets an A tier. It's just fun. It wasn't too fun to play against. It's like, oh, that guy has a shield. It's kind of annoying. The only reason I don't give it an S tier is because it was random, which is kind of annoying to like deal with. But I think it's still like a pretty solid idea. So for me, it goes in the A tier. Next up, we have Ninja. And for me, Ninja, it's literally the same from both set 1 and set 4. It's a little different, like the number wording, but the idea is the same. So either if you have 1 unit, you have the perk, or if you have all 4 units. And it's an interesting idea because, like, there's this point in the game where you're going to spike really hard if you hit all 4. So it's very satisfying in that theory, but it's very frustrating to also at the same time, because like when you don't have the 4, you're kind of stuck with having all these units in the bench and you can't really roll for them. Like, since you're kind of wasting a bunch of gold. Sorry. At the same time, it's very thematic because like the ninjas are cool. So there's a lot going for it, but there's also a lot going against it. And for that reason, I'm going to give it a C tier because I like the idea. But the thing is, they always had a 4-cost ninja as like the final one, so you had to hit a certain level in the game for you to start running this comp. So it's just kind of weird rolling for it, and that's why I think a lot of the times you didn't see a lot of this comp, and the only time you did see this comp is like when it's really, really strong. So it's either like really strong or literally never seen, and I think that is a problem where it would almost go in D tier, but I think it's just so cool thematically that I'll keep it in the C tier. Next up, we have Noble, which is very similar to Cybernetic in a way where it just is a buff for your whole team, making all of your units feel useful, which I think is a great, great idea. In general, that's why I also like Elderwood. The only thing is, it was kind of annoying like Cybernetic, where you had to hit Kale in order to utilize all 6 of them. What it did is it gave all your units life steal, I know that, like health on hit, and I think tankiness of some kind. For me, Noble is an A tier because like Elderwood, it's just nice to have an origin that just buffs your whole team and makes it feel satisfying. You could argue Battlecast, I should say, also goes in A tier because of that. But Battlecast just sucked, kind of. It was like only good when Victor was really good. and like some weird Cogmon comps, so nah, it can stay there. But these, your whole team utilized it pretty well, and it wasn't like as item dependent as this one. This one was really item dependent, so for me, I think that makes sense. Yeah. All right. Next up, we have Ocean. It's another mana one. It's chill. Doesn't get me too excited. I think this one gave your whole team more mana regeneration, which maybe is a little better, but I'll just keep it in the C tier. Next up, we have Phantom. Easy F tier. So unfun to play against. Kind of frustrating if you're using it. A little funny if it's like, you hit their Draven and you can just one-shot him for the... because they would only have 100 health, so you can just kill them instantly. But yeah, I think most people would argue was not one of the best origins. Another thing is, unlike Zephyr, where you can kind of counterplay it, where you can like see where the other person is putting the Zephyr, this one was just completely random, so it was really unfun if just like your carry all of a sudden had 100 health. So yeah, interesting idea, but nope. F tier. Next up, we have Pirate. I really want to put this in S tier because I love this strategy. What I'd always do is I would start going Pirate, and then I would transition into Shapeshifter Wild comps, which was like a really gold-reliant comp, but I would use the Pirate to transition to get there. But really fun. The only reason I don't put it in S is because it was a little annoying with the RNG part associated with it, and other people, it can be kind of annoying facing someone going Pirate, because then it's like they're getting ahead just because they have this one origin, and it's kind of luck based if you get the origin. So people love running it, so I'll put it in A tier. For me, it would be easy, top of S. Great origin. Next up, we have Poison, which is very similar to Demon, and at the same time Glacial for me, where it's just your enemy can't cast their spells because all their spells cost, I think it was like 35% more. Very annoying origin. It's a decent idea. I'm tempted to put all these in F. Just having an origin where the main focus of it is to limit what the other opponent can do. It's just really annoying. I'll keep it in D because it was kind of fun to use and wasn't as BS as some of these, in my opinion. Or with Cultist being just too weird to balance. So yeah, for me, Poison goes D. Next up, we have Rebel, which is one of my all-time favorite comps. Again, I really enjoyed it. The only problem with it is you had to keep all your units together in order to get the shield and the damage buff from it. So moving around Rebel was really a pain and kind of frustrating. Like, there was a lot of times where I was practicing just going click, moving all your units around. So for that reason, I can't put it in the S. But this is another one where it's similar to Cybernetic, similar to Noble and Elderwood, where it's just a synergy where your whole team's getting buffs and everyone feels kind of useful in a way. So I really like those origins. Next up, we have Robot. Easy S tier, purely based on the icon. That is the most hilarious icon. Also, this isn't a real origin. It was just to give Blitzcrank full mana, which later on, I think in set 3, they just did anyways. So they got rid of this origin, but this was in the beta. TFT, I think is how they called set 1. So, but just for the icon alone, I mean, how can you not put that in the top of S tier? Such a good origin. Next up, we have Shadow, which gave all your units bonus damage, and it would like refresh on takedowns, kind of similar to Imperial, but the numbers were like insane based on how high you went. And which is a comp I always remember not enjoying seeing. Just the enemy team would kind of chunk you. Originally, when I was like planning this, I had this really low, but now that I think about it, it's kind of similar to Imperial, I'm pretty sure. But yeah, I don't know. Shadow, I'll put in C tier. Not I was never a fan of it. I would put it F tier personally, but I could see people enjoying it. There's just something about it. Yeah. I'll put in C tier for now, but maybe I'll change it later. Next up, we have Space Pilot, is how I called it, because I felt like a little kid every time I tried to run it, because it's such a silly comp, and it's very kind of luck reliant. Like if you get the GP and the carousel, you're like really set to go. Otherwise, you have to roll for him, which was hard because he's a legendary unit, and this gives you no damage or anything. Like this Origin gives your team no combat stats. So once you hit it, same with Fortune, once you hit it, it's an amazing, amazing Origin for you. It's very annoying for your enemy. Like you just completely steamroll a game with this based on the amount of like items you can get, the amount of gold you can get. So for me, it goes exactly along with Fortune. Really, really fun Origin to play. Not that fun to play against, so I'll keep it in the B tier. Next up, we have Spirit, which gave your whole team attack speed when when those Spirit allies cast. It's kind of like Chrono, but I think worse because there's like a condition for it, while Chrono just did it automatically. So Chrono felt a little more satisfying in my opinion because of Spirit. Let's say your Spirit units died immediately, then they don't get the attack speed for your team. And the fact that it only happens once makes it a little less cool than Chrono, because with like 8 Chrono, for instance, if the fight lasted a while, like your Caitlyn would be shooting at like 3 attack speed or something like insane. Like it was just awesome. Chrono really cool. Spirit not bad, but not amazing. Star Guardian, another one of the mana ones. I think it's the best one of the mana ones because it's like as your Star Guardians cast their spells, and the rest of the Star Guardians gain mana, kind of similar to Spirit, but this time with mana instead of attack speed. So it's solid, but nothing too exciting. Yeah, but definitely better than these, I think, because it was more of a comp. Like Enlightened was a comp, but mostly just because Talon was really strong, or now Fiora's really strong, and the rest of the units are there to support. Yeah. I think that's good. Next up, we have Steel as an Origin. This one is when the Steel units dropped down to below 50% health, they became immune for a little bit of time, which I thought is hilarious. I really like this as an idea of an Origin. I think it's similar to Crystal, though, where it's a little too strong and like too frustrating to play against. Whereas an Origin, I don't think it's an excellent idea. Because of that, it's just like no counterplay to it. So the way you balance Steel is you make the units kind of awful to compensate for it, or like hard to play. I know Nocturne was really strong, Blender Nocturne with Blade Masters, but yeah, I think Steel goes in the D tier for me. Next up, we have the Boss, which for me is an S tier. I really like this Origin. I know Set's really strong, he's really annoying to face, but the Origin itself, it's very unique in a cool way, where he like runs off and he starts doing sit-ups and he's like healing and he's gaining damage. I had a discussion with my roommate where we were talking about this one. He put it a lot lower because it does too much and it's like too strong and does like true damage. And I agree with that. I think it might do a little too much, but I still think it's a really good idea of an Origin in general, really satisfying to see. So for me, it goes in the S tier. Next up, we have Tormented, which I also will put in the S tier. This one's with Kayn. Kayn's a very annoying unit to face, but the idea of having 2 options to go for like a legendary unit is really cool, because you could do it based, in theory, in my opinion is how it should be, in theory, is that you could choose which Kayn you can go based on like what items you have, what items would be good on him. It just mostly depended on how strong the red or the blue version was, but in a perfect world where they're equally strong, I think this is a great synergy, like a great Origin idea. So for me, it's an S tier. Just having like more options of units, I think, is cool. Next up, we have Valkyrie as an Origin, and this one gave your units crit chance. Guaranteed crit based on, I think, how low their health was. This one's a really cool Origin. It was very strong in set 3. Now it's back in set 4, but as a class, apparently. For me, I really like this Origin. It was very frustrating to play against, just like a huge damage increase, but that was mostly because the units themselves were really strong. I think this is an A tier Origin. It's very interesting. It's a very rewarding one to play around with items if you have good crit items or like attack speed items. Like this is a good origin. So I do like the idea of having an origin be like item related. So you have like an idea of what items you want because of the origin, which these do as well, but I've already talked about these enough. So for this one, this is an A tier. Next up, we have the voids, and I'll do set 1 void first. And this one gave, based on how many void you had, either a random unit. It gave them true damage on all their abilities and damage and all their attacks. So either it was your Rek'Sai or your Cho'Gath, which you really wanted it to go on. For me, this one's a C tier, similarly to Desert, because it was really annoying if you were playing tank comps just to have one comp if in the lobby absolutely shut you down. It's not fun for that like tank player, even though tank comps are usually not great, although in set 3 they were great, which is why I really like set 3, but that's for another video. So yeah, Void, both of them go in C tier for me, just because of the idea where they just shut down like any tanky team completely just because of the synergy, which is kind of too annoying to face, in my opinion. Next up, we have Warlord, which is similar to Cybernetic, except you didn't need items to make all your units useful. I really like the synergy. I think it's really strong. Some would argue maybe too strong, but maybe the other origins are just too weak comparatively. This one you could build a team comp around. It just gave everyone health and damage, which these... See, the thing with these is, like, it didn't give you raw stats. It only used stuff based on the origin itself. Like, there was a condition. This one just gives you raw stats. Same with this one, which just makes all your units feel more useful. And, like, everyone can use it. So I think this is another S tier origin. Next up, we have Wild, which gave all your units Ginsus if you had 4, or just the wild units Ginsus if you had 2. Also had the dodge chance thingy in it, where if you had 4, none of your attacks could be dodged. For me, Wild is I kind of want to say S tier. Yeah, I'm going to go S tier. I really like this origin. It's very fun to use. It buffs your whole team in a good way. I like it better than Chrono, I think, because I like the theme of Wild better. And like how in this, for instance, like in this, it's the same way as Duelist works pretty much in this set. It's almost an exact copy of it. And I really like what they did with Duelist in this set. So yeah, for me, this is an S tier. Next up, we have Woodland. And Woodland, if you got it, you just won the early game. If you got Woodland Druid, you just won the early game, and you could just win streak and gain gold. Very, very stupid. Very, very unfun to play against. It looked really cool. It was like, kind of like, oh, ha ha ha, that's cool. But no, it's just too strong early, and then it completely falls off late game. Like, this was only an early game synergy origin, which I think is a pretty bad idea. Sure, you could argue like this one's only an early game origin too, but it gives you gold and it's more interesting in that aspect. This one, like, you could try and go 6 Woodland, but you needed that Lux, so you had to like completely high roll to get the 6 Woodland, which I think is a really not a good idea for an origin. So no, this one's an F tier for me. Next up, we have Yordle, which gave your entire team dodge chance once you got it. Exact same as Cloud in a way, but it was only for the Yordle characters. For me, Yordle is honestly an F tier, mostly for the reason that if an enemy had RFC or Wild Buff, it just completely ignored your origin. And if anything completely ignores your origin so easily, I think that's pretty silly in general. And let's say they didn't have those items or that origin, then it was also annoying just to play against, because like you can't hit that annoying Vhagar that's one-shotting your entire team because of his high dodge chance. Yeah, not a fan of this origin. But I think that's a good way to look at it. Pretty satisfied with this list. It's honestly quite difficult to rate these, because I could rate them based on like how strong they were in the meta, but the meta is constantly shifting, so just how satisfying they are in general, I think, is the best way to rate them. Next, I'll be rating the classes, so if you're interested in that, make sure to leave it a like, subscribe, but I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll catch you another time. Have a good day.